Hello and welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandal. Joining us in our studio today is Windsor author Pamela Goldstein, and we're going to find out all about her very successful book, Still the Soul Survives. Pamela's book received an honourable mention in the memoir category at the Paris, France book competition. Still the Soul Survives was also the 2024 winner of the New York City Big Book Award in the Judaism category. Pamela also hosts a podcast called A Drop of Silence. Welcome to Scribes and Songsters.
Thank you, Veronique.
I'm so delighted to be able to sit down and have this conversation about this book. It's so packed that for a while I wasn't even sure where I was going to start, because I was looking at it and I wrote down 4 words that reminded me of what this book was about: love, loss, love, and living. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about the beginning of Pam Goldstein?
Well, I was born in a shack. No. It's back in the 60s when we were growing up, things were different. Kids were treated differently. We led sheltered lives in a certain way. We were allowed to be out all, till the lights came on at night, and then, you got sent home and everything. But as far as what you learned in school, it was very different than it is today. We were protected. So consequently, in high school, when we should have learned about World War II and the Holocaust and things like that, the year 1967, that was when the 6-Day War came out. And I'm grateful to the high school history teacher I had, Mr. Sabo, because he said, this is history in the making. He said, and I'm a firm believer that when you're a kid, you need to understand what the history that's going on, what it's about and why it's happening. And he said, you can always read about World War II afterwards. And I went, yeah, that's not going to happen. And then I went into nursing. And
what drew you to go to nursing? Because I'm asking, because there's so much, everything that sort of became part of your existence goes back to that decision.
Yeah. It's interesting. I really didn't think about it too much. You could be a teacher, and I hated kids. And you could be a politician, but they didn't want women. You could be a writer, but you wouldn't make money. And I was an only child. I was going to have to do that. What I wanted to be was an architect. And they didn't let girls do that. And Dr. Turner, my family doctor, he said, look at you. He said, you take care of the birds. You're always bringing little birds that fell out of the nest for me to put back. He said, you care about these people. You're the only kid I know who talks to all the people in the office while you're waiting for your appointment. He said, you need to be a nurse because you care. And I went, oh, okay. So that's how that happened.
And the book opens, and I'm going to go back to sort of that nursing thing in a minute. The book opens and closes with a very special person in your life. Could you tell us about that opening? Because you're not sure what's coming after that, because it's a huge story on its own.
Yeah. The book opens with me performing what they call a tahara, a Jewish tradition, on one of the Holocaust survivors that I took care of when she was a patient in the chemo unit. And it was kind of... I remember her sitting there, and she goes, Dolly, she says, let me ask you a question. And I went, oh, gosh. Because every time she said that, it was a nightmare. And she said, I want you to be the one to perform the tahara on me. I've had enough terrible people touch my body. And when I die, I want somebody who's a friend to perform that tradition. And what a tahara is you clean the body and you put on their shrouds and you get them ready for burial. And a lot of the questions when I go and talk to people, they'll say that's such an unusual thing for a group of people to do, but it's not. The only people who don't do that is Christian. Muslim people, they perform taharas and they call it a tahara even, but the family does it. Chinese and Japanese, they perform taharas, but they have a professional person comes in and the family sits there and says their prayers while that washing and cleansing and preparing the body for burial happens. And it seemed to me that it's only right that it had to start with that, because what you're showing is respect and love for the person who died.
And it brought back a lot of memories for me, because my grandfather, who died when I was only 6 years old, he was laid out on the dining room table in my grandmother's house. And after the priest did whatever the priest did, my grandmother and an aunt performed, we called it last office.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about that at the time. And the reason I found out about that was when I was a nurse in England, when someone died on your ward, you had to perform last office, no matter what religion.
Exactly.
And so when I read that, I thought, that what a profound opening for everything that was going to follow in that book. And so you talked about her being your Holocaust patient. So much of your life after the next couple of years was because of those Holocaust patients, wasn't it? Tell us about it.
It was, first of all, like I said, I had no idea what that was about. And my very first patient, I knew that gentleman when I was a kid, but we didn't put that together until he was in his 80s. There was a Velvet dairy bar on Wyandotte and Glidden Avenue. And next door was his store where he made clothes and he sewed things and he had materials for people to come. And the reason he had that was because he was a philosopher in Germany. And he wasn't allowed to be a philosopher anymore. He taught philosophy in Germany. And when he got over here, they said, no, pick this. And a lot of times, and people don't realize that, a lot of times when immigrants came through, they weren't allowed to practice what their career was. They had to do what was needed. And so he was a sewer and making suits and things. And he was telling what happened on that unit was we had a lot of burn patients one year, 1973. And there were 3 of them were from boat accidents. One was a woman who was painting glue on the floor to put tile down. And it exploded when it got near to the water heater because people don't think about ventilation and stuff like that. And he used to come to our unit every month for his treatments. But what happened with the burn patients was the smell developed sepsis, and a lot of them developed septicemia and all of those terrible things. And it was a horrible smell. And all of us nurses, we lost tons of weight. I went from 134 down to 85 pounds. And because it just clung to you in your nose and in your throat and in your mouth, and you couldn't eat. Whatever you ate smelled like that. But none of us thought anything of it until he came to the unit and became hysterical And when I finally calmed him down, what he talked about is that's what Auschwitz smelled, because they were burning the bodies, and the smell coming up came down in gray flakes, and they were greasy flakes. So they had a wretched, horrible smell, and that was the smell of Auschwitz.
Was that when you said your innocence disappeared?
Yes, because I had no idea anybody could ever be that cruel and that horrible to do something like that to somebody.
And besides the Holocaust survivors, some of the people you talk about who were also very pivotal, not just in their lives, but in yours, were some of the doctors, and Dr. Luborsky in particular.
He was a great man. Everybody you talk to who ever met Dr. Luborsky, they go, oh, Dr. Luborsky, what a great man. He's just very kind. He's everything you ever want a human being to be. And he saw, like, especially after that episode, he saw that I was just totally out of my league. I had no idea. And also that my mother was German. She had a German heritage. It was a German Jewish heritage, but we didn't know that at the time. And he saved me so many times from being totally flabbergasted and depressed.
And what I found very interesting, and before we get to your trip to Montreal, was that you kept having these moments with all of these Jewish Holocaust survivors, and they looked at you, and always you. I got the feeling that there was constantly somebody saying to you, "You must be Jewish."
Yes. It was so ironic.
Yeah.
Dr. Luborsky used to laugh. I could hear him laughing from the nurse's station every time. Dolly, you must be Jewish. I can tell you got a soul, a good neshama. And he would be howling. And he said, you're going to find one day in your heritage that your family was Jewish.
And then, of course, your trip to Montreal.
Yeah.
That
when I was single.
Yeah. That was quite a significant part of your life. And in fact, really did a number on you in good ways and bad.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about Arik.
Arik, yes. Arik was an Israeli fighter pilot. And his uncle owned a motel in Montreal on the main street. And him and a bunch of the soldiers came over for the summer so they could learn how to speak English better. And I'm like one of those. My husband says, you're like one of those really dumb women. He said, they could make 1 million passes at you and you wouldn't get it. And that's what was happening. And finally, he sent over a magnum of pink champagne and said, can we dance kind of thing.
Pink champagne can do it.
Oh, he likes me. But, and my friend Rose and I, we were there. We had taken a week off from the hospital, and we were there for a week, and we spent every moment together kind of thing. It was one of those romances like Roman Holiday. They fall in love in 24 hours, and that's kind of like what that was, only it was longer because I was dumber.
And one of the bits of glue in your relationship with the Holocaust survivors was that you would read Harlequin romances to them.
Yes.
And I thought when I read this incredible instant love story, I thought, she had a Harlequin romance of her own.
Yeah.
But of course, it didn't have a Hollywood ending.
No, it didn't. We had a cute meet, but then we had a tragic ending. He was going back for the high holidays, and he'd planned it. He'd bought the wedding. We'd gone and we bought the wedding certificate and everything. I'd bought a dress, but it was a simple dress. We were going to elope. Neither one of us cared about the big wedding. And he went back for the high holidays, and the Yom Kippur War started. And being a fighter pilot, he was killed within the first 72 hours of that war.
Pretty psychologically damaging.
It was, but a nice Jewish boy came along.
It's interesting how everyone who made passes at you or came into your life was a nice Jewish person.
Yeah.
I think one of the most horrifying stories that you tell is about, is it Bela and Sarah?
Yeah.
And their little boy.
Yeah, it's Ellie. Ellie, the one who's...
Ellie.
It was Ellie, the one who's Tahara I'm performing in the first chapter. It was her baby. Her baby was the one that they threw it in the air and stuck it on the bayonet and tossed it back to each other and played games with it.
I can't imagine how you even live for the rest of your life with that in your head.
She couldn't.
Yeah.
She couldn't. I was the first person, and it was 2 or 3 years before finally she would kibitz and she would joke around with me. But until it took a long, long, long time. And she had to learn how to trust people again, which she didn't want to do. And that it was really hard. But it was hard. It was hard for all of us nurses who were listening to that story that night when she was telling us how this baby had been killed and her husband was killed. And because basically basically humans are good people, and good people cannot fathom that kind of evil. And to hear that this has happened is really hard. I remember all of us talking for days about it. We had no idea how you could possibly cope with that kind of, like, this person did this soldier, he's an 18-year-old kid, threw the baby up in the air and stuck him on the bayonet and tossed him to the next one. What kind of cruelty is that? Is it a cruelty? It's like, it's crazy.
When I read another part of the story, I had to put the book down when they talked about what they did to little babies.
Oh, yeah. They would peel their skin off and make lampshades out of them and stuff like that. And that was a common thing. That was a prized possession. And I remember I talk about a Nazi who lived in the county, and he was highly respected. He led a stellar life when he was over here. But when they put his stuff up for auction, one of the things in there was a lamp. And I could not, the smell of it was because it was 70 years old, and I couldn't put it in the book. I couldn't write about that. It was so appalling to me.
So many people in the world have no idea, and I know there are, films and documentaries, but most people don't get to see the documentaries and films that have the kind of graphic, ghastly things that were done.
And the other thing about them, like yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the Holocaust ending in Auschwitz. And I was watching Shoah, where they're showing the piles and piles of bodies and everything. And I remember thinking, like, that's such an overwhelming thing to look at that it makes it unbelievable.
Yes.
It has to be one-on-one for you to grasp any idea of how horrible that is. And then once you do grasp that idea, you go, my God, how did these people survive? How did they survive?
Your relationships, you write very honestly and openly about your relationships and things that happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
After Arik's death, how difficult was it to form like a real attachment like that again? Because you had a number of relationships.
Yeah, it was impossible. It really was. It took about a good, I think, when I look back, I go, oh, it took me years and years. It actually only took me 2. And I went, we had survived the riots of 67. Mm-hmm. And that was an eye-opener on another group of people who are suffering so horribly, and nice people like us do nothing about it. Mm-hmm. And what we did back then, I don't know if you were here in Windsor, we used to go back and forth. Detroit nurses would come over for workshops, and Windsor nurses would go over. And that's when I met Dr. Herschel. I'm going to call him Dr. Herschel, but it's not his name. But, and he was extremely intense. It's what made him a great ER doctor, like that meticulousness to detail and everything. And if it wasn't for him, I probably would have sunk a lot further down. But he just said, no, you got to snap out of it. He said, you can't do this. He said, if they could survive that, you can survive this. And he just put it into perspective.
And he wanted you to love him.
I know. I felt so bad. I did love him, but just not that way. He was an amazing man.
You're going along and you're meeting all of these Jewish people, and they were having an effect on you, right?
Yeah. And the other thing was, some of it I could really relate to. And my cousin Sharon and we would talk about it a lot. And she said, I've always felt this draw to the Jewish people. And I said, I didn't until I met, my Holocaust survivors, and until I fell in love with Arik, and until I met Leon and William. And then I realized there's something there. But I was the grandchild that my grandmother was the closest to. So I remember her lighting lights on Friday night. And I remember all these little traditions she used to do. My cousin Sharon doesn't remember any of it.
And you mentioned William.
Yes, William.
Along came Will.
Yeah. My tennis pro.
And you started to take lessons to become officially a Jewish lady.
Yeah. And that was actually that decision I made before William asked me to marry him. I talked a lot to Dr. Laborsky, and he says it's not an easy road. You see what's happening, and where you're working, you're seeing all of this racism, and that is very prevalent in the world, and not just towards Jews. It's for a lot of people. And if you become a Jew, then that becomes your responsibility as a human being, is to help defend anybody who is being attacked.
And what would you like people to take away from your book?
I think the biggest thing, and I've thought about this a lot because I get asked that question, is that people realize democracy is not free. Democracy has a lot of responsibilities. It's a wonderful thing. But as somebody who lives in a democracy, it's your responsibility to defend every person, their civil rights, their basic civil rights.
About in this country,
it's really
there's
bad
so
here.
much, many protesting against Jewish people.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
And I was reading before I came here that the Prime Minister went to a Holocaust memorial and never mentioned the word Jew.
Yeah. He's it's not that he's not fond of us. He much prefers another type of person, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are you planning on doing next?
Well, I was just telling my publicist that when I took it was in the 70s. No, it was in the 80s. I was married and I was pregnant with my second child, and that's when Ellie and I first met. And I used to read, like you mentioned, I used to bring cookies, and I would read the latest Harlequin romance, because back then they came out almost every week, and every woman I know has read a Harlequin romance. They were addicted, and it was Ellie and the women who said, "Dolly, you should write our story." And she saw me writing in a journal. I was trying to write something descriptive about spring. And she says, "Only don't make it a documentary. Nobody will listen." And I went, "Oh God, what is it they want me to do?" Well, it was a Harlequin romance, epic, historical, spy, espionage, war book. And I went, "Oh crap!"
And you kind of shoehorned a lot of stuff into your book.
I know. So I did write a book. It was called A Matter of Principles, and it was almost 300,000 words. And then I read it to them. They loved it, and most of them died so pleased that their story was in this book. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago, and I found it when we were moving. And I went, "This isn't one story. This is about 4 stories." So this is their story. And coming out in the spring, Only the Dead Find Peace is the war, spy, espionage, Israeli soldier falling in love with a Canadian nurse when the plane gets hijacked. And so I'm covering that part of it.
Well, we'll look forward to it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you. All the best.
You too.
Well, that's it for another edition of Scribes and Songsters. Wish we had more time. A very special thanks to our guest today, Pam Goldstein. And please do check out her book, Still the Soul Survives. There's so much more you'll learn. Thanks to our Scribes and Songsters team, producer Brian Sweet and technical producer and editor Gary Glass. Grateful thanks to Tony Toldo and the Toldo Foundation, and to Neil and Tina Queering for their support. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon, right back here on Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandal. Bye for now.